Hello and welcome to this short introduction to our session on cultivating critical reflexivity for conservation. We're part of the Asynchronous workshop, Political Ecology, Conservation and Agrarian Change, which is taking place as part of the wider POLLEN 2022-23 Political Ecology Conference, which will include live sessions next year in South Africa. So this session has been convened by myself, Sam Staddon, along with Omar Saif, who's from the University of Edinburgh, along with me in the UK, also by Fleur Nash, who's at the University of Cambridge in the UK, and Timur Jack-Kadioglu from Fauna and Flora International in the UK. So all of us in our research are kind of interested in this area of critical reflexivity and conservation. Omar at the moment is doing an embedded ethnography in Nepal, looking at conservation practice and issues of trust and justice. Fleur is doing her PhD in Kenya, again through an embedded ethnography, looking at conservation practice there. Timur has just finished his marine conservation PhD in the Philippines. He's got his viva during this workshop, so we're wishing him luck. And he now has a position looking at social equity and rights in FFI. And then myself, I have a background in conservation. I worked in conservation for about 10 years before coming back into academia. And I worked in Tanzania for a couple of years, and that was really important for me. And I think why I left was because I felt uncomfortable because of race and issues of colonialism. But at the time, as a conservationist and trained as a conservationist, I didn't know how to articulate that or explain that. But I think now I can look back and reflect on why that feeling was so uncomfortable and why I left. And then my work now looks at conservation in Nepal and in Scotland. So we want to, this session focuses on critical reflexivity. So we'd like to engage with this concept and practice and the potential of critical reflexivity in conservation. And thinking about what critical reflexivity is, there's many different ways that we could define this, I guess. We like this one particularly from a paper by Idahosa and Bradbury, where they talk about critical reflexivity as an embodiment, a personal and internal and a constant consciousness. It is deeply embedded in the process towards a decolonial future and understood as the ability to reflect, learn and unlearn, and to dismantle overt and subtle legacies of oppression in the process of knowledge production and practice. Critical reflexivity should make us hypersensitive to the multiple ways of knowing, being in, and understanding. So they're talking about critical reflexivity here in terms of academia more broadly, but we're interested in using this to think through questions of critical reflexivity in conservation. So I guess, there are many reasons why right now why we might be interested in promoting critical reflexivity within conservation. For example, 30 by 30 agendas, COP15 that's coming up of the CBD, racism in conservation and pushes to address racism, whether that's subtle or overt. Racism in conservation, as depicted in this piece by Reson Kantai-Duff and other conservationists in Africa. Efforts to decolonize conservation and conversations to decolonize conservation. And then, of course, IPC, Indigenous peoples and local communities led efforts for conservation as well. And all of these things really push us to see the importance of critical reflexivity and what it might help us, the end that it might help us work towards. And this is already being done by political ecologists from both the global north and south. So this is just a few papers that kind of deal with this topic. And there's luckily, an increasing amount of debate on this, specifically within the conservation sphere. So this session aims to kind of explore whether critical reflexivity can enable conservation practitioners and researchers to do this reflecting, learning and unlearning that we heard about in the definition a minute ago. And whether through this it's possible to dismantle these overt and subtle legacies of oppression associated with processes of knowledge production and practice in conservation. So in terms of the guiding questions for this session, we're thinking perhaps about who is or maybe should be engaging in critical reflexivity. What can or what should be critically reflected upon? Is that just positionalities? Is that far more than that? How does critical reflexivity take place? What does it actually mean to do this process of critical reflection? What are the consequences or potential kind of opportunities offered up through critical reflexivity? What does it actually enable to take place? And finally, sort of how can critical reflexivity be cultivated and promoted, but also understood so that we can do this better? So we have 3 pre-recorded presentations as part of this session. We had a few more lined up, but I think the shift going online makes it a little bit harder to maybe engage. But we're really glad to have these 3 pre-recorded presentations that you can find on the web pages that you found this on. So the first is by Alejandra Pizarro-Choi, who's from the University of St Andrews in the UK. And her talk is entitled The Geopolitical Ecology of Conservation Funding, Discourse and Power in Counter Illegal Wildlife Trade Programs in Peru. And she'll actually be joining us from Peru, from Iquitos, for our live discussion. So we hope she's able to join us from there. The second pre-recorded presentation is by Benedict Singleton from Malmö University in Sweden, and his paper on clumsy learning towards a pedagogy of reflexivity. And then we have Sayam Banerjee from the National Institute of Advanced Studies in Bangalore, India. And he'll be offering a very personal reflection, and his talk is entitled Becoming an Encounter, the Local Community and the PhD Researcher in Human-Elephant Conflict. And then in addition to these 3 pre-recorded presentations, we're having a live discussion. And that live discussion is taking place on the first day of the workshop. So hopefully you're seeing this before this takes place, so you can join us. So it's on Monday, the 24th of October, between 3 and 4 British summer time. And the Zoom link is there and the passcode, and that's also available on these web pages. So we really look forward to welcoming you to that live discussion, and really hope you enjoy watching those 3 recorded presentations. Many thanks on behalf of Omar and Fleur and Timur and myself.